long before voices carried the name of Perseus across generations, before artisans carved his triumph into marble and storytellers shaped his deeds into legend, there existed only a child born into the quiet violence of fear. And long before Medusa became a symbol whispered in dread, before her image was used to frighten and warn, there lived a woman whose life had been irrevocably altered by cruelty and abandonment. Their stories, though bound together by myth, are not merely tales of heroism and defeat. They are reflections of something far more human, of isolation, injustice, duty, endurance, and the cost of becoming what the world insists you must be. Perseus entered the world already burdened by a destiny he neither chose nor understood. His mother, Danae, was the daughter of a king whose fear eclipsed his humanity. A prophecy had foretold that Danae's son would one day be the cause of his death, and rather than confront fate with courage or wisdom, the king allowed fear to reshape his love into something unrecognizable. Danae was no longer seen as a daughter, but as a threat contained within flesh. In response, he imprisoned her, believing that stone and distance could silence prophecy. Yet history, both real and mythic, has shown repeatedly that fate does not yield to confinement. Nor do the gods respect human attempts to control what has already been set into motion. Perseus was born within those walls, his first breath already tied to a future shaped by another man's terror. When the king discovered the child's existence, he chose not redemption, but desperation. Danae and her infant son were sealed within a wooden chest and cast into the open sea. It was an act framed as necessity, but in truth, it was abandonment, disguised as survival. The image is difficult to ignore. A mother clutching her child in darkness, surrounded by the violent indifference of the ocean, holding on to hope where none should reasonably exist. In that fragile vessel, Perseus encountered the world's first lesson. Innocence does not guarantee protection, and yet they survived. The sea delivered them not to death, but to Seriphos, where a fisherman named Dictys discovered them and offered something rare in their story: compassion without expectation. He gave them shelter and dignity, not because he stood to gain from it, but because he chose to act with kindness where others had failed. It is a quiet but important detail. Within a narrative filled with kings, gods, and monsters, it is a humble man who preserves life. Perseus grew in that modest environment, shaped not by luxury, but by resilience and gratitude. He became strong, but not hardened. This distinction is essential. Hardship did not strip him of empathy. Instead, it deepened his understanding of it. His bond with Danae was not casual. It was vigilant, protective, and deeply rooted in shared survival. He saw what she endured. He understood, even if only gradually, the weight she carried beneath her calm exterior. From that understanding emerged a defining truth of his character. His strength was not driven by pride, but by love. But peace, particularly in myth, is rarely permanent. King Polydectes of Seriphos desired Danae, not with respect or genuine affection, but with entitlement. He saw in her something to possess, and in Perseus an obstacle to remove. His approach was calculated. Rather than act openly, he constructed a situation in which Perseus would willingly walk into danger. Under the pretense of a wedding, he demanded gifts, horses, from those around him. Perseus, lacking wealth but not pride, offered instead to bring the king whatever he desired. It was a statement made without full awareness of its consequences, and Polydectes seized it immediately. He asked for the head of Medusa. It was not a request, it was a sentence. Medusa was no ordinary adversary. She was a figure surrounded by fear, a being whose very gaze turned life into stone. Those who sought her did not return. Polydectes knew this. His demand was not rooted in ambition, it was rooted in elimination. Yet Perseus accepted. Not because he believed himself invincible, but because refusal would have meant surrendering his mother to a fate he could not allow. In that moment, courage was not heroic in appearance. It was necessary. Far from Seriphos, removed from the politics and manipulations of men, Medusa existed in isolation. Her story, often simplified, carries a deeper tragedy. Before she became what the world feared, she had been something entirely different. In many accounts, she was known for her beauty, remarkable, unforgettable, and dangerously visible. But beauty, particularly in myth, often invites violation rather than admiration. What followed was not transformation born of choice, but of punishment and cruelty. Whether framed as divine retribution or consequence, the result was the same. Medusa was altered into something unrecognizable, her humanity overshadowed by horror. Her hair became serpents. Her gaze became fatal. Her identity became singular. She was no longer seen as a person, only as a threat. The deeper tragedy lies not only in her transformation, but in her erasure. The world did not remember who she had been. It remembered only what she had become. She was exiled, not just physically, but narratively, reduced to a function within stories rather than a life that had been disrupted. Her existence became defined by isolation. Surrounded by statues of those who had sought her out, she lived among silent reminders that no one could approach her without consequence. It is a haunting existence, powerful, feared, and entirely alone. And into that isolation came Perseus. Their meeting, often framed as a simple act of heroism, is anything but simple. It is not merely a confrontation between good and evil. It is an intersection of two lives shaped by forces beyond their control. Perseus, driven by duty and love. Medusa, shaped by suffering and abandonment. Neither chose the roles they were given, yet both were bound to fulfill them. The gods intervened, offering Perseus tools that made survival possible. A reflective shield, a precise blade, winged sandals, a means of invisibility. These gifts were not just instruments, they were acknowledgments that the task required more than strength. Perseus could not face Medusa directly. To do so would be fatal. Instead, he relied on reflection, distance, and restraint. When he reached her, the setting itself reinforced the gravity of the moment. Stone figures surrounded him, testaments to past failures. And at the center, Medusa lay sleeping. This detail alters the nature of the act entirely. She was not engaged in battle. She was not aware. She was vulnerable in a way the world had long denied her. Perseus approached carefully, guided only by reflection, never meeting her gaze. He did not see her fully. He saw only an image. There is a quiet tragedy in that, two lives colliding without ever truly encountering one another. He struck. Her story ended in silence. From her death came something unexpected, life. Pegasus emerged, a symbol of beauty and transcendence. It is one of the most striking contradictions within the myth, that from violence, something extraordinary could still arise. Even in death, Medusa could not be reduced entirely to horror. Perseus escaped, carrying her head as both proof and weapon. It would serve him again, most notably in saving Andromeda, and ultimately in confronting Polydectes. When he returned, he fulfilled his purpose. He protected his mother, ended the king's threat, and closed the cycle that had begun with fear. But the resolution is not without complexity. Medusa's power, the very thing that defined her isolation, became the instrument of justice. Her suffering, even in death, was repurposed. It is a conclusion that invites reflection rather than simple satisfaction. This is why the story endures. It is not simply about victory. It is about contradiction. Perseus is heroic, but not untouched by violence. Medusa is monstrous, but not devoid of tragedy. Their story exists in the space between admiration and discomfort, where empathy complicates judgment. To remember Perseus solely as a conqueror is to overlook the weight he carried. To remember Medusa only as a monster is to ignore the humanity that preceded her transformation. Their story asks something of its audience, not just to observe, but to consider. If this retelling resonated with you, your engagement is genuinely valued. Please consider liking this piece if you found it impactful, sharing it with others who appreciate thoughtful storytelling, and leaving a comment with your perspective. Did you view this as a story of heroism, tragedy, or a balance of both? How did your perception of Perseus or Medusa evolve through this interpretation? Your feedback contributes meaningfully to the continuation of nuanced storytelling and helps bring deeper narratives like this to a wider audience.